Hey, everybody. Good morning or afternoon, depending where you're joining us from. We are super excited for our webinar today. As we let people in, go ahead and just say who you are and where you're from in the chat. We have Jackson Hart here from Halda, and then myself, Nicole. I'm just going to introduce us, get us kicked off for a second. We're both in Utah. It's pretty chilly today.
Finally, we've had such a warm winter.
I know we kind of had reverse winter and spring here a little bit. And Kristen's joining us from Arkansas. Oh, nice. We kind of have all over.
Awesome. Love seeing the chat. We're going to use the chat quite a bit today, so get familiar. Thanks for those that are introducing themselves.
Yeah, don't be shy. Use the chat. Okay. Indiana, Kansas. Awesome. Well, I think we can go ahead and get started. Jackson and Kristen, do you guys want to just do some quick introductions and then we'll get into it?
All right, thank you, Nicole. So we're going to be presenting you with the Graduate Student Journey Rewritten, and this is a research project that NAGAP and Halda did together. We're going to present to you some of the results that we have from surveys, and we've done this over multiple years, so we can kind of see trends. Halda sent the survey to prospective and enrolled graduate students, and they had 359 that completed the survey, and NAGAP, we sent it to all of our members, and we had over 83. So the results that you're seeing today, they were surveyed earlier this year. I'm Kristen Sturba. I'm immediate past president of NAGAP. I'm an associate provost for students and administration at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, which is located in Little Rock, Arkansas, if any of you are from Arkansas. And my co-presenter is Jackson Hart, who I will let introduce himself.
Thanks, Kristen. My name, as she mentioned, I'm Jackson Hart. I'm the AVP of Strategic Partnerships here at Halda. I've been at Halda for, it's crazy to say, over 4 years. So I've absolutely loved what we've built here. And to just add a little bit of maybe some context around where, to me, and where at Halda, like, this research is so impactful, is I think it really revolves around what we've truly built here at Halda, which it's one of our main values. If I was out of this booth and I looked on our wall, it's when the student wins, everybody wins. And I think that's really what we're so excited to present about today, is that all of this data is truly coming from the mouth of the student. So it's always interesting and always gratifying for us to gather this relevant, rich information that's truly coming from the student to help you market and really kind of transform the way that you're engaging with students.
Yeah, awesome. All right, let's get into it.
So one of the things that we know is that graduate enrollment teams and everyone in higher ed actually are working harder than ever. So some of the results that we saw were that only 9.8% of institutions saw marketing budget increase this year, and 25.3% saw decreases. So as you are being encouraged to increase enrollment, you may not have an increase in some of those budgets. Some of the top challenges that survey responses indicated were cost funding constraints, international enrollment uncertainty. There's been a lot that's been happening with visas and other things for international student enrollment. So programs that are heavily reliant on international students may be seeing decreases in enrollment. Staffing and capacity limitations, you may be being asked to do more with less. And we've also found that 53% of the GEM professionals who completed the survey can't update their own admissions web content without approval from another department, which can limit how quickly you can adjust and address and try to answer questions that prospective and potential students might want to know about. So what we want to know, for your first enter something into the chat, is what has been your biggest challenge in your current role? So just put a couple of things in the chat, and it can be something that's listed on here or something not listed. I will tell you that one of the biggest challenges for me has been a lot of the federal regulation changes that we're trying to keep up with at our institution, whether it's reporting, for some of the new requirements for iPads, or if it's the changes to student loans. Okay, so Christina said, cannot update own admissions web content. Misty, we are given 0 to market, but are told that we need to work harder to increase enrollment. Yeah, those are definitely continue to be challenges. Extremely limited institutional aid for grad students. Yep. Again, more feedback about not being able to answer your admissions web content. Yep. Lead generation, top of the funnel issues. As you're thinking about putting things in the chat, and we want to continue to have you put those in there, has this changed in the last 2 months? We know that there's been a lot of changes. Again, I'm going to say federal regulations because I deal with that a lot at my institution. Has this changed in the last 2 months, or are you continuing to kind of see the same type of challenges? I will tell you, we're still trying to learn about some of the loan changes, continuing to see same challenges. Christina? Mm-hmm. Yep, limited institutional aid and it's probably going to be a bigger issue as the changes to, with the Grad Plus loans and graduate and professional loan limits go into effect. And again, Catherine says, lead generation has been an issue for the past 2 years. Okay. All right. Well, hopefully some of the information that we'll share with you today might help with some of those challenges. So.
Yeah. And Nicole, I think we can go to the next slide here. I think that this slide to me, I think really kind of helps paint the picture for how the student journey has changed. And like Kristen mentioned, I think a lot of the data that you'll see here, hopefully you're able to take back to your teams to then leverage to maybe reframe, reshift the way that you're engaging with graduate students, right? So that blue box there, to me, I mean, I think it showcases obviously, and as it says there, that students are doing less broad exploration and more targeted research, right? If they're researching just about 5 programs investigated, and that's down from 6 last year. So they're arriving at your institution's doorstep pretty already filtered through what they're actually looking for, which meaning they've already done a lot of that deep homework on you pretty specifically. And so when you think about your outreach, right, oftentimes if we have a generic outreach plan, sometimes that can feel a little tone deaf for somebody that's already done a lot of that high level research themselves, right? And I think that I think the kind of stark difference there in that black box is that the average applications have gone up even just slightly. So even though they're investigating fewer programs, they're applying to more of the ones that actually made the shortlist. And so the competition necessarily at the top of the funnel hasn't intensified, but the competition has intensified really at the application stage. And so what this means to me is that students are really kind of hedging their bets across a tighter and more intentional set of programs, which means, again, when you think about how you're branding yourself, it means that you need to stand out during this decision phase and not just provide that awareness when it comes to just traditional marketing. To me, this number in the yellow box is, I think, really impactful, right? Over 73% are enrolling at an institution where they didn't obtain their undergraduate degree, which means nearly 3 in 4 students are really starting completely fresh. They have no existing relationship, no loyalty, no familiarity. And so they can't necessarily be won through this institutional inertia. They have to be earned through, I think, really what it comes down to is personalization and personal engagement that really speaks to who they are, but also what they want when they're in this investigation stage and actually looking for what's going to make the best program for them. We can go to the next slide here, Nicole. This, I think, also really kind of helps paint a picture about where students are doing their research. And I think the data points to that the website, that your internet presence or digital presence is truly the front door for a lot of these students. 67% of students first heard about programs through internet search. That's nearly 2/3. Or I guess from this perspective, 2/3 didn't find you through a recruiter. They didn't find you through campus visit or a mailer. They found you through Google. And so I think a lot of times when we think about like where the first impression comes, it might be from that counselor's handshake or at an in-person event, but in reality, it's really from probably a small search result snippet or from a web page. Which means again, when you're thinking about maybe some of these challenges that you had mentioned, right? Your digital presence truly is your admissions office, and for a majority of prospective students. Likewise, 60% of students visited the institution's website first. So this confirms that truly the front door is the website, not an event, not an email campaign, but they're doing their research. And I think students are truly putting themselves in the driver's seat. And so when they're forming their initial impressions and they're filtering programs in or out, they really begin this self-directed journey really on your digital turf. And so it's interesting because we at Halda, we work with we work with a number of graduate programs. We work with a number of undergraduate programs and institutions that are leveraging our platform across both audiences. But that number for undergrad students is up in the 80%. I don't know the exact number there, but it's interesting to think about kind of the difference in terms of where undergrad students and how many undergrad students are using the internet versus how many are using it from the graduate perspective. Word of mouth is still carries a lot of weight. I think, nearly 1 in 3 students are still hearing about your institution through word of mouth. I did a lot of work in the K-12 space before I was at some of my time at Halda. And as you can imagine, that number for word of mouth was skyrocketing. But it's a lot different once, individuals get older and they're doing a lot of that research themselves. The number I think that I want to just quickly highlight is this last number, because to me, this is pretty stark from what I would have assumed, right? I think a lot of institutions are investing pretty heavily in social media, yet it ranks last in terms of where students are actually gathering or doing their initial search. And so when you're thinking about your budgets, when you're thinking about where you're allocating time and resources, it's interesting to say, like, are we potentially over investing in social channels given that they're underperforming when it comes to discovery? We can go next here. Or I think we skipped one. Yeah, there we go.
So this is where we see kind of a disconnect between what professionals believe and what students believe. So professionals and students both do rank internet search as the #1 method for program discovery. But like Jackson said, if you look at where professionals rank something like social media, they think it ranks 3rd, whereas the students ranked it much lower. We also know one of the questions that we've had about some of this research before is students are beginning to use things like ChatGPT to discover information about programs. When we did this survey, that was not included as one of the options. Are you using ChatGPT? But there has been a lot of discussions about different types of AI that students are using to help identify programs or program fit, program costs. They're using it to compare programs. Again, not included in this survey, but I think that's something that we want to include in future surveys. And lastly, professionals ranked word of mouth 4th, and students ranked, alumni networks 3rd, and didn't have necessarily word of mouth on their top places for discovery.
This next slide that we'll talk about as Nicole's switching here, I think to me was pretty interesting, right? Because I think when we think about, again, like in our heads of kind of what the traditional admissions experience looked like, it's a lot of handholding, it's a lot of interacting, it's a lot of personalized engagement. And what we're seeing is that a lot of that journey happens without you, right? 13% of students said that they always spoke to an admissions counselor before they applied. That's a pretty striking minority, right? The traditional model of admissions, like I mentioned earlier, it's built around that counselor relationship, those outreach calls, is only happening with a small fraction of students before they actually have already made up their mind. So by the time most students are actually talking to you, the decision is often already leaning one way or the other, right? And likewise, 17% of students nearly or never spoke to admissions at all. That's nearly 1 in 5 students went through this entire process. They researched, they applied, they possibly even enrolled without a single human touch point, right? And that might not be like by the lack of trying by the institution. That could potentially just be students not wanting to have that conversation. But I do think it kind of shows that there are students out there that can and will go through this process completely on their own, right? And they've made really a major life decision based entirely of what your institution has maybe passively communicated through your website, through rankings, through peer reviews, and your content. And again, I thought this was a really kind of an interesting point, is that your brand oftentimes will do a lot of the talking, whether you're ready or not, just given where students are going. And then lastly, 40% of students said that sometimes, which was the stealth majority, right? And I think this is a pretty important number. They're labeled as stealth majority for a reason. And I think that this really kind of goes to show that they're engaging on their own terms. They're dipping in and out of contact unpredictably. Their timelines might not be set. And so this is where, again, anytime that we can personalize outreach and really curate the response to students with relevant touch points is so important. So whenever they do resurface, that there's already that connection established for students. Oh, Nicole,
Jackson, I'm going to take us back a couple slides. Christina Barker here had a really good question.
Okay.
I'm going to add to the stage. It's very zoomed in. It says, how do we help students find us to be in the top 5 to 6 programs that look into further?
It's a good question, right? And I think it kind of goes back, and I'd love to hear your perspective, Kristen, like being in seat. But it's, I think, just kind of where my head goes initially, right? And it's interesting because the data kind of contradicts that, right? Is like, I would initially say, well, we need to market more, right? We need to spend more on social media. We need to get our visibility. But apparently from the data, that's not what the most relevant way of engaging with students. And I think what in my head, again, I tie back to the traffic that's already there on your website. And I think that's where a lot of institutions are potentially falling short, is that we have all this traffic and we know that's where students are going, yet we're not maximizing that engagement. And so there's a lot of tools out there. Obviously, I'm biased towards Halda, and I think we're the best tool on the market to help capture and engage and convert that traffic. But to me, when you think about the average conversion rates on websites, is typically about 1%. So you're leaving 99% of traffic on the table in terms of getting those students into your funnel. So if you can reimagine the way of engaging with students in a lot more personalized way on your website, I think the answer is there, right? But Kristen, I'd love to hear your perspective of being in seat to that question. It's a great question.
I've seen lots of different things done, increased marketing, search engine optimization. There's a lot of method, and I do think that things are continuing to evolve. But I think, especially like I said, when they're using AI to find us, starting to look at how that works. But I think Jackson's right. I think there's a lot of information on your website that you can use to kind of help get those students that you're interested in.
So I guess to just kind of further answer that, Christina, like I would just think about, like, I would maybe potentially look at your current conversion rates at your RFI, at your application, and compare that against what your traditional website traffic looks like, right? And if there's a pretty big gap there, which I would imagine there is, just how it is with most institutions, that's where I think bringing on third-party vendors or maybe like strategically planning around how we can maximize and increase that. And you'd be surprised with, even if you can increase that conversion rate from 1% to 3% to 4%, I mean, that's going to be a lot more students at the top of your funnel to help you kind of get that end goal number of enrollments.
And I want to emphasize one of the benefits of these types of research partnerships that NAGAP has with people like Halda is because they've got that insight on their side that we may not have, right? We're all focused on our institution. We kind of know what we do, but they can kind of help us see things kind of across institutions that we may not have. So again, that's kind of one of the reasons that we do these types of partnerships, because we're able to leverage their experience and leverage our experience in the field together to provide this type of information to you guys.
Totally.
Awesome. Thank you.
So we just ran through that slide, Nicole. Yeah, perfect.
All right, so we've got a poll for you. What do you lead with? Okay, so when you're thinking about the messaging that you are sending to prospective graduate students, what is the do you lead with cost, financial aid, affordability? Do you lead with program quality, faculty outcomes? Do you lead with convenience, flexibility, format, or do you lead with a mix? So when you're thinking about your marketing, what are you leading with? So let's look at so far. We've got 4 votes.
I love seeing these come in.
And we presented this at NAGAP Summit. I don't know if any of you are there. And so I know how the group there answered. So it'll be interesting to see how you all answered versus that group. Okay. We only have 9 votes. Anyone else want to vote? Well, I can tell you that those of you that have voted align with what we saw at NAGAP Summit.
Yeah.
Our attendees primarily led with program quality, faculty, and outcomes. The interesting thing, Nicole, if you want to go to our presentation, or back to our presentation. Yep, next slide.
There you go.
So what our survey respondents led with was financial costs, which has not aligned with what we've seen. So at that time, the people that answered the survey, they led with financial costs, then program quality, and then finally convenience format was third. What students actually prioritize is the things that you all are leading with overall. Program strength, faculty quality, reputation, financial aid, and then last cost. Now, one thing, again, this was done earlier this year. One thing that might change with the changes in loans, I'm curious, if that's going to change next year, right? Is this going to be something that students are more aware of with regards to financial aid or cost because of limits and access to federal student loans? So, good job.
Right. Question from Kirk.
Yep.
So I'm conducting some informal surveys of graduate students, and the responses mirror this data. Web is overwhelming. Looks like it's cut off there, but I think I think I saw this in the queue, and it sounds like, and Kirk, if you want to jump in the chat here, but it sounds like you were really just kind of confirming what you're seeing on your end with the data that we're seeing. Was there a question there, or was it just
he just said referrals is number 2, and then social media did not come up with any of the responses. So what we're seeing is exactly what Kirk is seeing.
Perfect. Great. Yeah, that's interesting. And thanks for sharing that, Kirk. I love hearing when we can compare that data at more of the individual level, because obviously this is spanned across the country and a lot of different students. And so interesting to see that we're confirming that. Thanks for sharing. As we're switching back to the presentation, I've got a couple of slides here. So, I guess get used to my voice, but to me, these are some of the most impactful data points that we have. And Nicole, if you can just go to the next slide here. What we found, and this is, I think, really one of the most stark differences that we've seen, is that 77% of students rated that a personalized answer as to a question that they had as significantly or crucially important, versus the data there at the bottom that says that 55% said the same about a quick response. So that's a 22-point gap. And so to us, that really shows that students value personalization nearly a quarter more than speed, which to me is really interesting, because I think we've always heard that speed to lead is crucial, and it is, right? And I'm going to get to that point here in just a minute. But that's not a marginal difference, right? 22 points. It's a pretty decisive difference. Yet on this slide, it also showcases, I'm going to see where it is right here in this bottom blue box that says that admissions professionals estimate these both as roughly equal. So about 81%. So this means that institutions aren't systematically misreading student priorities, but they're likely, and I think we've seen this a lot as we're having conversations. And just to give some background, like Halda's platform is built around personalization and individualizing every student engagement. So I have a lot of these conversations every day, every week. But it seems like what we're hearing is that they're not misreading the student priorities, but you're likely over-investing in response time infrastructure rather than investing and really under-investing in response quality, right? We see here in kind of this text kind of floating in the middle that a tailored message in 30 minutes beats an auto reply in 30 seconds. So this, again, reframes kind of that operational conversation. If your team is proud of fast response times, trust me, you are not wrong. That is not the wrong approach here. And honestly, you're probably solving, and you are solving, the second most important problem. But again, speed without relevance can sometimes risk is feeling a little dismissive to students who really ask something specific and personal. And so to me, I think the real kind of highlight here is that gap of what students are saying is helpful versus what they're saying is kind of the actual experience. And so it's not necessarily a resource problem or a staffing problem. It could be, right? We talked to a lot of schools that they don't have the bandwidth, they don't have the budget or the time to individually respond to every student, which is where partners can come into play to help do that. But I think what's interesting here is that it could potentially be an assumption problem, right? And so we're optimizing for the wrong variable, because I would say that maybe no one's really measured this until we've actually seen this data until now. So let's go to the next slide here. I think this also kind of showcases like what students are actually getting, right? They want personalization, but most aren't getting it. 79% of students say that personalization really helped their decision, yet only 16% received it consistently. So it's not a small gap there, right? 63-point chasm between kind of the impact and execution. When nearly 4 in 5 students credit personalization as like the meaningful factor where they chose to apply, yet 1 in 6 actually received that reliably. So the demand is pretty overwhelming, yet the supply is, again, pretty non-existent. And again, I don't think this is by any fault of any institution, because personalization at scale is really hard. And that's where with AI, with artificial intelligence, and with the right partners, there are options out there that truly allow you to operate as if you had a team of 100 or 200 to personally engage with all of your students, right? So you don't have to do this alone. It might just take some outreach and some conversations to see what tools are out there. Like, I mean, obviously, Halda, we excel in this, but I know there's other options out there. 41% of students rarely or even never received personalized message. So nearly half of students went through this entire admissions process feeling really just kind of like a number, right? Not a person, even though that personalization really moves decisions, what we've seen. I think really this is kind of the cost of the status quo, which has just been kind of generic. We engage, students are coming to us, but now with that shift in terms of shortlists are getting shorter and we really need to compete at the application stage, it's important that we truly individualize outreach. And I think it reflects on what we're used to today, right? I mean, think about anything that we're doing digitally, right? If I'm shopping on Amazon, if I'm looking for movies on Netflix, my music on Spotify, all social media channels are completely curated to every single individual user. Yet when we get to a lot of institutional websites, it really becomes kind of an encyclopedia of information. And that's where until now it's been hard to do. But now with the right tools, you can truly transform your entire communication flow and digital experience into a Netflix-like individualized engagement. And I do want to highlight, right, because I think we are moving in the right direction. If you see that bottom bullet point there, that there is progress, right? 59% rarely received personalized messages, and that's down to 41% today. So again, we have made some progress. So we're moving in the right direction. But again, progress isn't the same as solved, right? So there's still work to do, but it is, I think that point to me was really impactful because we are moving in the right direction in terms of how we're personalizing. Let's just go quickly to this next slide. We won't spend too much time here, but these are just kind of what the students remember, right? And we've highlighted some of these, and I'll just read a couple. I'll read kind of two of these that they personally emailed me and checked up on me while I applied. So again, that personal connection. And then this second one here, I think, is also a really kind of powerful way of engaging with students more face to face, depending on where they are, right? Is that the representative setting up a Zoom meeting to go over questions and walk through the program. So again, schools are doing this. It's just how do we do it more at scale? And I think those are the questions that we need to look at and answer as we're moving through this. All right, last slide for me for a second, then we'll turn it back to Kristen. But I think this is pretty interesting data in terms of what students are actually receiving. And when we compare that against what their expectation is, right, it's a pretty stark difference, right? 3.6 days on average is the time that goes by before institutions actually respond to an online inquiry, right? So 3.5 days is really kind of, if you think about it, an eternity when a student's in that decision-making process. And if you remember from earlier, right, students are looking at fewer and fewer programs, and they're looking more deliberately. So that time that goes by can really make or break if those students are going to end up enrolling at your institution. And so while your institution is silent for, in some cases, 3+ days, that student is already actively engaging and researching competitors. So really impactful data, and I guess something to think about in terms of, like, again, pairing speed to lead with what students are expecting, which is personalization. 22% waited more than 6 days, which is wild, right? So nearly 1 in 4 students waited nearly a week before they actually received a response to their inquiry, which is an action that they have taken, right? They're in that moment of high intent, and yet it took, in some cases, right, almost a week before they received something. And at that point, right, think about emotionally, right? When I purchase something on Amazon and it gets there the next day, I am thrilled. But if it takes more than a couple of days or even a week, like, that, my emotions sometimes have moved on from, like, what I actually had purchased. I know it's not the same as buying something on Amazon, but just something to maybe compare to, like, our personal lives there. Only about 6% of students received same day responses, right? Which I think is really kind of the gold standard here, right? Again, I don't think we necessarily need 30-second responses, but if we can spend 30 minutes or an hour to actually personally engage and email these students, that is where I think there could be potentially kind of fill the gap in terms of helping students gather that information and getting that relevant content when they need it, when they're in that moment of high intent. And then lastly here, 63% of students found that the information that they did receive was highly or mostly valuable, right? So again, this is not a content problem. And to me, this is pretty devastating, right? Is that when institutions do respond, nearly 2/3 of the students actually genuinely find that information valuable, which, meaning, again, it's not a content problem, but where the bottleneck happens is with speed, and consistency of delivery, and not necessarily the quality of information. So again, as you're reviewing kind of your comm flows, again, it might not necessarily be a content problem, but it's how we engage and in what modes and in what we're actually saying to the student to make that feel like it's a different type of outreach. Christina, we find that most students respond better via text. How hard should we be pushing phone calls, virtual meetings? I'm assuming you have some other options there. So I can confirm that. Like, we at Halda, we have a number of different tools under our platform. We can provide AI phone calls, AI text messages, emails. And it's interesting because students have, and I don't have the exact numbers top of mind, but again, I know it's in the high majority that students still say that email is their number one preferred method of communication. And I think closely behind that, right, when we think about our calling and texting tools, the phone call is really cool. The AI conversation that happens just vocally is awesome, but it only happens about 7% of the time. 93% of students, from what we're seeing with our tool, are requesting text messages, right? And I think it kind of goes back to what we're doing today, right? This sounds funny, but like I would probably rather text my parents or text my wife rather than like jumping on a quick phone call if I'm kind of in the busyness of my day, right? It's not to say that I don't value that conversation, but think about when a lot of these students are doing their research and it could be passive, right? And texting might just be the most easy modality that, again, I can come back to, whereas a phone call typically does happen kind of in that one moment. Kristen, would you add anything?
Well, and we don't have, I don't think we like really looked at this closely. I also wonder if this varies by age, right? Like I know if I'm just getting a text that it's like an automated marketing thing, I'd rather like, well, I don't talk on the phone either. If someone calls me, if I don't know the number, I don't answer. But, to me, a virtual meeting or an email, is more something I'm interested in. We currently aren't using texting for our prospective students. We use it a lot for current students and other reasons, but yeah. And I wonder if that would vary based on age and maybe even type of program. You might get better responses. One of the things that I think is always helpful if you haven't done this is, have you met with your current students and asked them, like have a focus group of like, what do you think about this? We've done that a lot, asking their opinion on things when we're developing things. How should we change how we're communicating something? And this might be something, Christina, that you could ask some of your current students, like, what do you think if you had received a text? Or what would you value more, a text or a phone call? So that's kind of my feedback on that question. But thanks for the question, Christina.
Great points. How would a platform like Halda integrate into the CRM that's already in use? Great question. We integrate, depends on your CRM, but we've built our platform to be completely agnostic. We don't want Halda to feel like another CRM. We want your CRM to be the source of truth for all of this relevant student data. So any conversations we start, any interactions, any behavior and context that we're building about the student will all be reflected in your Slate instance, right? We don't want this to be two additional data silos. We want Slate to be the source of truth because, again, when counselors are doing that personal outreach, we don't want there to be gaps into saying, oh, well, there's all this backstory and context that happened on the website, but I'm not able to see that and leverage that, right? We want you to be able to leverage all of this data in your CRM to help inform all of your outreach. So, and Scott, we can talk offline too, just about like what your CRM is and like how those specific connections happen.
So as graduate professionals, we do have some structural barriers that are preventing us from accessing our information. So we found that 69% of GEM professionals did not have access to all of their website data, which we have already told you this is a great way to engage prospective students. And only 5% had full visibility. 53% needed another department sign off to update web admissions content. This is a challenge because a lot of times you need to rapidly make changes, right? And if you have to get through different approvals and sign off processes, it might delay what you need to do. If you find out, well, we need to make sure this is more clear for our students or our applicants, you need access to that website. Some of the challenges that our survey respondents indicated that were causing some barriers in these areas: budget constraints, staffing limitations, friction between departments, and lacking of marketing return on investment visibility. So for you all, how many of you, just answer yes or no in the chat, how many of you have full access to your website data? No. Yes, that's great, Misty. So this may be something that I would encourage you to talk to whoever is in charge or manages this process, your IT teams or whoever, and try to get access to that data so that you can use it. Yeah, it looks like a lot of you do not have access, which this mirrors closely what we saw at the NAGAP Summit. The majority of people in our audience did not have access to the data. Okay.
So again, I think, and we won't spend too much time here, as I want to make sure we can have some time for some Q&A at the end. And I appreciate all the questions that have come in. So thanks for being interactive as we're walking through this. It doesn't feel like just a fire hose of information. I think this is really interesting, right? And I think it kind of gets down to like the core emotion of the student, right? 48% of students say that personal fulfillment is really their primary motivation when it comes to enrolling at a graduate institution, right? So nearly half of grad students aren't driven primarily by salary bumps or career advancement, right? They're driven by something that's more personal. And I think, again, when we look at the rankings, and I think it's different when we ran through this poll, right? Admissions communications a lot of times do lead with rankings, ROI, program logistics. And so we're pitching more of the features rather than to people that are really shopping for meaning and kind of fulfillment in their lives. And then kind of the last 2 points here, just quickly, 29% cite that lifelong learning is their primary driver. So almost a third are really motivated by intellectual curiosity and growth. And so these students want to know kind of what thinker your program is going to help them become, not necessarily just a job title that they'll hold afterward. And then 46% of students seek a balance of practical outcomes and personal growth, which again I think is probably a larger majority. I think just outside of just this initial, I know the data says it's only 46%, but I think this is kind of like that nuanced middle of students who want both, right? And I think that's where like the response and messaging and how we engage with students, and if we can leverage context about what the student's behavior is exhibiting, can really make or break that conversation initially of what they're actually looking for. These next couple of slides, this is really kind of just, I think, kind of reviewing, right, what we see. So we know that students are investigating less programs, yet they are, and I know it's not a huge jump, but they are applying to more, right? So there's fewer chances, faster decisions that students are making. So that window really becomes a lot tighter. And that's where I think, again, as we review what the actual outreach looks like and needs to sound like, individualization will always win out. Again, we say it we say this about every day. I try to say this on all my calls, but when the student wins, everybody wins. And the best way to help the student win is to be helpful. And so if we can simply be helpful and provide that information to the student when they need it in that moment of high intent, that's where institutions are really going to win. So this last slide that I think for me, just as we move to the next one here, really kind of just summarizes some of the biggest changes, right? And we've already mentioned this. We don't need to go too deep. But like the funnel is tighter at the top. People are more decisive as they move into the middle. Internet search will continue, and I think will even become a bigger and bigger influence for students as the main entry point. And then third, right, and I mentioned this earlier, but personalization has really overtaken speed, right? I would rather receive an individualized message rather than a fast message if I can see that that's automated. And so I think these are kind of the biggest things to maybe take back to your teams as you're considering your overall graduate recruitment strategy.
And again, just focusing again on the gaps between what students are expecting and maybe what some of our practices are, although a lot of you are doing some of those practices already. The cost versus quality misread, make sure that when you're reaching out to your students, as many of you indicated, that you kind of, lead with program quality and not necessarily cost. We need to get access to your information on your websites. Like we said, 69% can't fully see your own website data. That's something that you can do. It should not, it's a no cost to you. Personalized delivery gap. We've already talked about this several times. 41% of students aren't getting that. And then finally, that social media overestimation that we're seeing everywhere. We think that it's a lot more important than students think it is, right? They're already on social media all the time. Maybe they don't want to see us on TikTok doing a dance while we're talking about our program. Maybe you could have your own students do that. But again, they don't care about the social media piece as much as we think they do, which one of our participants today indicated they see the same thing, which is good to hear. All right, so here are some student-centered strategies you can apply now. Invest in your website personalization over how much you're spending on social media. Again, we know they don't care about social media as much as we think. That's where 60% of the students start. So this is the easy place to start focusing your efforts on. Build engagement pathways for those stealth applicants. You know they're there. We have the data to show also that students are doing this. They're self-applicants. Only 50% never or only sometimes talk to admissions. So how can you reach out to them more and provide a more personalized experience? Close the response gap with personalized speed. We know that they want that personalization, number one. Even though the response time is important, personalization is what leads. Reframe your outreach, which, or maybe you can, for those of you that are already doing this, enhance your outreach around program quality, faculty, and outcomes. Again, this is a no-cost thing that you can do. Outcomes especially are going to become larger and larger as we look at some of the federal changes. So anything that you can do to let your students know about the program quality and those outcomes will help get more people applying and then enrolling in your programs. And then lastly, try to advocate for your access to your website data and maybe the ability to update that data, update your website when needed. So, maybe you don't have the ability to advocate for that, but maybe a director or a dean or someone else, you can talk to them and show them some of this information about how important it is for your team to have this access. But again, these are some student-centered strategies that you can take away today. So this is a QR code that you can use to download the full report that shows all the results from today's surveys that this research project that we, Halda and NAGAP worked on together. So just go to there and you can download the full report. And if there's any other questions, we're happy to answer them. All right.
We have a couple of questions in the chat. First, do you include scholarships when referring to cost?
I cannot remember if are you asking if the survey include scholarships or if when you are promoting your program, if you should include scholarships when you're referring to costs? I think that in the survey, we just said costs.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Like the scholarships.
Yeah, and I
scholarships
think
tied with program quality.
Mm-hmm. I also think too, like scholarships, like I think that's also another way that you could leverage more of an individualized outreach, right? And I think that's where like maybe cost in general is like, okay, well, that's great. I know other people receive scholarships, but what does that mean for me? What scholarships can I obtain, right? So if you have some of that backstory on the student, like anytime that you can individualize that with like, hey, you potentially could qualify for X2 or for up to X, I think really helps boost that initial conversation rather than just kind of leading with like, oh, well, 50% of students receive financial aid. It's like, well, what does that mean for me? I think is kind of the question just initially. Great question. Any other questions as we're wrapping up here? And thanks all for your participation. It makes it a lot. I know we can't hear you, but hearing you in the chat makes it a lot more of like a conversation than us just maybe talking at a screen. So we appreciate that.
Yes, absolutely.
Great.
Okay, thank you all for being here. We will send out the recording as well as the presentation slides in a follow-up. Yeah, that's all we got for you today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, team.
Thank you.
Bye.